The Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, was signed into law by President Bill Clinton on September 21, 1996. DOMA denies lawfully married same-sex couples more than 1,100 federal benefits and protections. DOMA defines marriage and spouse to refer only to the union between a man and a woman. This documentary focuses on 3 couples and their challenges to stay together during the DOMA years. It is also about the hope and the opportunities that came out of Section 3 of DOMA being struck down, which allowed them to have the same rights and freedoms as any loving couple. I spoke with Daniel, an American immigration lawyer living and working in London. He was able to shed some light on pre- and post-DOMA legal issues facing same-sex binational couples.
There were no long-term solutions, really. There was no green card, so whether you were married or not, and it was a difficulty because a B2 visa, the temporary visitor visa, is a temporary visa. So if you were transferred by your company and you had your spouse come with you and spend 5 years, and then your company decided they wanted to keep you, they could apply for a green card for you, but not for your spouse. So it either meant that you left, or your spouse got his or her own job and tried to apply for a working visa, and that's where that sort of creativity came into play.
I asked the couples how they were personally affected by DOMA. One of the couples I spoke with was Mark, an American, and his British husband, Mike.
Me, personally, it was a nightmare. My father, came to the U.S. in the 1920s when Italians were openly discriminated against. And he at that point in American history, you had to give up your citizenship to your other country, to your homeland. So he had to become an American citizen and renounce his Italian citizenship. So growing up at that, and then coming to England, and then being told by the United States that I'm still, responsible for filing a tax return, and theoretically even for paying taxes, but I can't live in the country with my partner because they don't recognize my marriage because...
Your American marriage.
Because, they don't recognize my American marriage because it's not federally recognized. Yet, this country, England looked at me and took me in willingly saying, well, you are the spouse of a British patriot. It doesn't matter whether it's a gay marriage or not. It's a legally binding contract somewhere, and that's all that matters to us.
The attitude in the UK has been far more liberal, and we haven't seen anyone have any problems here.
Another couple I spoke with was Robbie, an American, and his British partner, Jack.
Yeah, we have been personally affected by DOMA because, basically, moving to the States was not an option when the Defense of Marriage Act was in place. And, that meant, for me, very little sort of time for me to see my family, to go back to the States. That option wasn't available to me. It just felt really strange not really being able to go back to your country, your own country where you're from, to live. It just feels a bit like the door has been shut on you. We've been pretty lucky compared to some couples who have had to spend years apart, or, spend crazy amount of money to sort of, fly back and forth to stay together. So we've been pretty lucky, really.
In the case of Allison and Stefania, they both had to leave their countries, the US and Italy, in order to be together, as at the time neither country recognized gay marriage for immigration purposes.
So when we met, and she was living in Rome and I was living in New York, we started going back and forth, and ideally she wanted to move to New York because I loved New York. I still love New York. And so she was going to move there, looked for a job, tried to get a visa, had some job interviews, and they said, if we didn't have to give you a visa, we would give you a job. And that's just nice, but not that helpful. And then even the quotas on H-1B visas, so work visas, there's a quota. And so even one of the jobs that said, we would even consider sponsoring you. But the problem is that they offer visas once a year. And when they offer that visa, they're all gone within a day. So even if you get sponsorship, you're not guaranteed to get a visa.
Before DOMA was struck down, if you were a foreign national that was going to be employed temporarily in the US, your partner could, your spouse could go with you, but only as a visitor. So we have a visa that we call a B2, which is a visitor for pleasure. And several years ago, many years ago, the State Department issued a cable to its embassies around the world saying that the B2 is the appropriate visa for unmarried partners and partners of LGBT people. So if you were not legally married, whether you were straight or gay, you could go to the embassy and apply for a visitor visa, show that you were in a relationship, and enter the US as a visitor. But those visas didn't allow the B2 visa holder to work. And so for a lot of couples who were both in gainful employment in the country where they've been living, it was almost impossible for them to go to the US and have one of them only be able to apply for a visitor visa.
And because DOMA made us not a couple, it meant that we didn't have the option that if we got married then, because we'd been together for 2 years, so it was pretty significant. And if we'd gotten married then and we had been a straight couple, I could have sponsored her for a visa. And that just wasn't an option for us. And so since the H-1B visa didn't really seem to be an option either, and she didn't want to go to school, so a student visa wasn't an option, it basically meant the choice is to be together, you have to leave the country. And it was really painful because the country was saying, no, you're not equal. So it was really...
Indeed.
Made me very angry.
Even though she got that treatment, she still has to file taxes. It's a little bit unfair, to be honest, but we'll be hopeful that some things will seriously change.
Yeah.
It's not the right way to treat people. You want money from them, but you don't give them any opportunity to live a life that they deserve to live equally like everybody else. So.
For some couples, staying together meant leaving behind jobs, families, and stability in order to be with their partner or spouse.
I had an apartment, I had a job, I had a life, and I certainly didn't have the money to support a life in 2 countries. And so it was, that then became the push to get me here, you know, against the odds, basically.
And it had to be that way around because my business is largely London-based, certainly at the moment, and it certainly was then. So there was no way that I could uproot myself to do it. So I thought it'd be easier to bring you in.
Yeah, exactly. You do all the work.
We've just had to really get to terms with the fact that our life was going to be here in the UK. But obviously things are changing now, so maybe we can look at that again and reevaluate what we're doing. But you know, we realised quite early on that we really loved each other and were quite serious, and just moving to the States was not an option. So for us, it was just about making our life here, really. Even though Robbie really missed home and really probably was thinking about maybe going back to the States at about the time that we met.
Because I was already here in the UK, it was much easier for us just to stay here anyway. But, as a result of being here, us being together, I've decided not to move back to the States. That's had probably a bigger impact on me, just because I have been so far from my family for so long now. And yeah, and I do miss it, but, yeah, so I have had to make quite a few sacrifices, yeah, definitely.
I started with the uncertainty immediately as soon as I moved here, leaving a full-time job, which I had been doing for 6 years, 7 years actually, almost 7 years. But it was safe, and come here with basically nothing in my hands. I suppose that really tested our relationship as well, because from the beginning I had to rely completely on Alison. So it was very difficult for me not to have an independence and being at home trying to look for a job. I have to say that thanks to our relationship and what we put in our relationship, and thanks to Alison, I kind of remained sane for the following year without having a job. And then it was the opposite. I got a job and she was made redundant. So it was kind of like she was in my situation. And again, we stood by each other and tried to make it work.
Daniel explains the options if couples are in civil partnerships or not in any type of union.
At this point, civil partnerships and unmarried partners are not recognized by the US government for immigration purposes.
We are in a civil partnership here in the UK, and not in, well, when we entered into a civil partnership, there wasn't a marriage here. So that's all we could do at the time.
For some couples such as Mark and Mike, marriage was the only way they could stay together at the time, even in the UK.
We got married in October 2010, so we've been married 3 years and 3 months at this point. The fact that the federal government took so little notice of state-based gay marriages meant that it was really easy to go to America and get married and have a marriage ceremony in Massachusetts than it would have been at that point for Mark and I to do a civil ceremony here in the UK.
Now there is that option as well. And hopefully we will be able to convert it to a marriage, and that should make it much easier for us to live in the US if we ever wanted to go back.
In Robbie and Jack's case, they are not in a civil partnership or married. This interview was filmed prior to the legalization of same-sex marriage in the UK in March 2014.
I think it's great that this country had civil partnerships because they were on an equal footing in the sense that all the legal rights were there. However, you know, I think with marriage that's recognized internationally, well, in countries that have recognized same-sex marriage, but there's more of a, you know, recognition internationally with that. Civil partnerships, a lot of countries don't have any sort of legal standing for that, so there was more difficulty there. So in terms of domestically, internally, it was equal, but as soon as UK citizens were abroad, you know, that could be treated differently. So I think it's brought us closer to equality, definitely. It has had an impact, or will have an impact when it comes into play this month.
I asked Alison and Stefania what converting a civil partnership into a marriage involves.
So right now, because marriage has been legal here in the UK since, I think, March it was, and they didn't write into that law a provision of what you do when you're in a civil partnership already and you want to upgrade it to marriage. And so if we want to upgrade right now, we would have to dissolve our civil partnership, so basically get divorced, and then get married. Because a civil partnership counts as a union, and you can't enter into a union when you're already in a union.
The Marriage Same-Sex Couples Act in England and Wales allows same-sex couples to get married now, which means that same-sex binational couples' marriages would also be recognized in the US for immigration purposes.
And so by the end of the year, they're saying you should be able to, rather than get divorced to get married, you should be able to just upgrade it so that your civil partnership becomes a marriage. And that also makes it different for US purposes, because at the moment, if we did that, if we dissolved it and then got married, our marriage would count as starting on the day that we got married. And that makes it difficult to prove to the US that we're in a lasting relationship. It's not hard for us. It's harder than if you've been married for 6 years. So once that changes, then the upgrade will kind of go back to the day when you first entered into a civil partnership. And for us, that was in July of 2009. So it just makes things easier. It also seems ridiculous to have to get divorced to get married.
Yeah.
We don't want to get divorced.
The US has decided that only people who are legally married, and that's the case for both hetero and homosexual couples. You have to be legally married to be able to benefit from immigration status based on your spouse.
I asked Daniel what types of US visas are available for same-sex binational couples.
We do have two types of visas, though. One for couples who are already married, and that depends where the marriage was celebrated. If the marriage was celebrated in the US, they can, as I said, adjust status and become a green card holder. If the marriage was celebrated outside the US, they can apply for a visa that allows them to enter as a permanent resident. So they get a green card as soon as they enter. They're stamped in at the airport with all of the rights and privileges and responsibilities of a permanent resident of the United States. There is another category of visa, though, that's called a fiancé visa. And it's for people who are not yet married, but who are in a bona fide relationship with a US citizen, and they can enter the US on a temporary single entry visa for the purpose of getting married and residing in the US. And the way that that works is they apply, it's sort of a hybrid between what we call a non-immigrant visa, which is a visa for temporary purposes, and an immigrant visa, which is like a green card, a visa for permanent residence. It's sort of a hybrid because you apply for it sort of like the non-immigrant visa, and when you get it, you get to make an entry into the US with the intention of staying there. You have to be married within 90 days of making your entry into the US, and then once you're married, you file to adjust status and become a permanent resident.
I asked if any of the couples had applied for a green card yet, and if so, what the process was like. Among their responses, there seemed to be a fear that if they didn't get one soon, and there was a change in administration, their opportunity might be taken away.
Not yet. Actually, I'm in the process of becoming a citizen here. So, and in some ways, even though it doesn't really matter, I think that's more important to get right now, because that can take 6 months.
And we might get to the end of that 6 months and decide that actually the States isn't where we want to be at this point.
Right. So it's more important for me to complete what I started here and become a citizen. Once I'm a citizen and I have a passport, a British passport, then I'm in a great situation. I'm in a great position. Because it's a very short period of time, processing time for Mike to get his green card. I think it's just easier once we get to the end of that process to start the green card process. By then we'll have already chosen where we want to live and kind of done all of the groundwork. So really it'll just be a matter of getting the paperwork in order and making the move. At the moment, everything seems to be okay. I'm not, I feel almost like we have to strike while the iron's hot and get his green card now, just in case, just in case something changes. It probably won't, but who knows?
No, we haven't done that yet. I mean, with work and family commitments, it's something that isn't likely to happen, immediately. It's something that might happen in sort of a few years' time if we do choose to move to the States. Mm-hmm.
Well, even if we choose not to move, you can still get a green card.
Yeah, that's
I mean, like at that stage, I think we should get one.
No, we've done the green card lottery. Oh. So when we first met, we started doing the green card lottery. We'll shoot for her every year. And it's basically a lottery where you win a green card, but it's real. It's a real thing. So we would do the form, but the chances of getting a green card that way are tiny.
It's a lottery.
Yeah, it's a lottery. And because Italy is one of the countries that you can do it with, so we did do it. Didn't win. So we thought about it at one point, but then we knew that if we applied, we would get denied, and then we could have filed a lawsuit and made that kind of our thing. But it was hard enough just trying to live together and sort all that and move and make a life for ourselves. And we like to travel, so if we had done that, she would have been stuck in the US while it was going through the courts and stuff, and we just didn't want to do that. But I'm glad that someone else did.
You're talking about eating those.
Yeah. Did deal with those issues, not directly with the green card, but they did address those issues, so I'm thankful to them.
Based on the couple's uncertainty about applying for green cards, I asked Daniel if many of his clients have been successful in applying for them.
Yeah, yes, I'm very happy to say that all of them have. We haven't come across any yet who have any insurmountable issues. It's permission to knock on the door, and we didn't have that for so long that now people do come in here and they say, okay, well, we're married now, so we can just go, right? And it's not right. You still have to file the same petitions that everyone else does. You still have to follow the same law that everyone else does. If you have a criminal history or an adverse immigration history, you still have to make the same applications to waive the grounds of ineligibility and admissibility that everyone else does, but at least now you're able to do that. So it's certainly not blanket permission to enter the US, but it's blanket permission to apply to enter the US. There is another type of visa that allows someone who is married outside the US to enter the US to wait for their green card application to be processed. But frankly, I haven't done very many of those because the processing time for that visa is just about the same as the time it takes to process the green card. So most couples aren't opting for that. And we're very lucky in the UK to be one of, I think it's 12 cities in the world, or 12 countries in the world, where there is a US embassy that will take what's called direct filing of the visa petition. So it used to be that wherever you lived in the world, if you lived with a US citizen spouse, that spouse could go to the embassy and make an application for you to get your green card. You get your green card and move into the US. They changed that rule, I guess it was 2 years ago, so that you can no longer do that. And now you have to file, if you're resident in a country that doesn't have a US Citizenship and Immigration Services office, you have to make your application domestically in the US, and you join the queue with everyone else who is married to a US citizen. We're lucky that in the UK, our embassy in London has a US Citizenship and Immigration Services office. It's one of, I think, 12, and you can actually file directly here. So if the US citizen spouse is in the UK in a status other than visitor or student for at least 6 months, they can file directly with the embassy, and it takes about a month to get the petition through, and then about another 2 or 3 months to get the immigrant visa. So it's actually very fast if you have the benefit of living in a jurisdiction where there is direct filing.
I asked Daniel if he has worked with LGBT binational couples where the non-US citizen was from another country, as in the case of Allison and Stefania.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't present really any other difficulty. Like I said, we're in a position now where everyone is treated the same way. And I won't even use the word difficulty, the issue for couples who don't live in the UK or who are not citizens of the UK is that they may live in a country where there is no direct consular filing. So unless there's an emergency, like I talked about before, they have to wait a much longer time than someone who is resident in the UK or another one of the countries that has a US Citizenship and Immigration Services office. But that's no different than any other couple who lives outside the jurisdiction of a USCIS office abroad.
At the time, we didn't really have any choices in terms of where we could live together. In Italy, obviously, gay couples are not recognized, and in the US at the time it was exactly the same story.
Italy does not currently recognize any same-sex unions, but in April of 2014, the Civil Court of Grosseto ordered that same-sex marriages performed abroad would be recognized there. In July 2014, Bologna, Naples, and Fano also decided to recognize same-sex marriages performed abroad. And just recently, in September 2014, Empoli and Pordenone followed.
So we had to really, it took us a while to work out what would be the best and how we could make it happen. London was one of the few places that could host us both. And so Alison got transferred with her job at the time. So luckily she had the opportunity to be transferred And I gave up my job in Italy and came here and was jobless for a year and a half.
And she tried to move to New York for a while, so we tried to see if there was a way for her to get a visa. And the best way was to get a student visa. So if she went to get a master's, and she really didn't want to do that. So we decided that she didn't want to be doing something for a year or 2 years that she really didn't want to be doing, just so we could be together. So we looked into options, and
I applied for a few jobs in the US, but to get a job in the US, you have to show, as a non-American, you have to show that you have something that American people don't have, and so it becomes really difficult. I have a degree from the UK, and I suppose my set of skills are just very common. It was a catch-22 to really try to find something that I could do over there, and for which I could get a work visa. Not an easy. It wasn't easy at all. So then we had to rework what other option we had out there, and so the easiest was that Alison got transferred.
Yeah, and I was lucky.
In the UK. At the time, she could do it, luckily, because she used to work for a law firm that had offices in London. And that's how we started. Italy was never an option, and it's not even an option today. I think that there are still a few years that, for a few more years, I think Italy needs to sort out a few things before gay couples can be recognized. So, yes, the UK was one of the options. The other would have been Canada, but we didn't have, at that point, any interest really in going there. It would have been far for both of us to go and live there, so we just choose a middle ground. And beside the initial difficulties, it's now we are quite happy here, but it was very difficult to adjust at the beginning. I had already lived here, so I kind of knew the culture, and I kind of knew how things worked. For Alison, it was a real shock. Coming from North America to the UK was, from a cultural point of view, she needed to take a lot in, and she needed to adjust, and that took a while. And at the beginning, it was really upsetting for both of us, because we felt that both of our countries have really made us exile. It really made us go away. There was no space for us in the US or in Italy. So here we are now, quite happy with it. It took a while to get to this point, but it worked out, luckily. So still happy that we found a common ground for both of us.
Exiled is a word that was used by the couples to describe how they felt about the US not recognizing their same-sex relationships.
But it's been great, sort of establishing a network of people who are going through similar sort of situations, who might, like how I did, feel a bit like, not exiled, but maybe in a sense exiled from the US, up until the Supreme Court knocked down DOMA, or Section 3 of DOMA.
The United States took a long time to get there, and in the meantime, I was exiled from a country that my father fought for, exiled from a country that my father taught me, to have pride in and to identify with, and then I can't live there with my partner because we're not worthy.
On June 26, 2013, the Supreme Court made a ruling that Section 3 of DOMA was unconstitutional, allowing same-sex binational couples to be legally married under U.S. law for immigration purposes, and same-sex couples in the U.S. generally to be afforded the same rights as opposite-sex married couples. The ruling came after a case involving Edie Windsor, the widow of Thea Spire, who was ordered to pay a state tax in the sum of $363,000. This was solely because they were in a same-sex marriage and were not eligible for a tax exemption like opposite-sex married couples were. In this case, Section 3 of DOMA was found to be unconstitutional as a deprivation of the equal liberties protected by the Fifth Amendment. In the Fifth Amendment it states, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation." There were some mixed reactions when the couples were asked about their feelings regarding Section 3 of DOMA being struck down. Just to clarify, this is the section that stated marriage is only legal between a man and a woman.
I was really excited. I'm not only because I'm an immigration lawyer and I've spent the past 12 years trying to come up with creative solutions for people to be able to live together. Immigration lawyers have wanted this, and in truth, the federal government has wanted this. I've never seen the government move so quickly. I was sitting next to a friend and colleague who specializes in LGBT immigration cases, and when DOMA was repealed, she got a message on her BlackBerry within half an hour saying that the local USCIS office was going to move forward on one of the cases that she had filed for a same-sex couple. And to have that going from a Supreme Court ruling to a government agency actually acting based on that ruling is, I think, unprecedented.
Mark's opinion was always that if the Supreme Court ever got hold of it, that it could do nothing other than declare that that section was unconstitutional and would have to be repealed. But even so, we were talking to people who weren't quite sure how the balance of judges on the Supreme Court would vote. We went to meetings where any number of different options were laid out, and it didn't look that great for a speedy resolution. And then we were told that even if that section of DOMA was repealed, that it would probably take years for the real effect on things like immigration to be felt. So I think when the news came, we were tremendously grateful to hear it, but we didn't expect it to change our lives immediately.
Excited, but and very pleased that it went as quickly as it did when it finally got its momentum. But yeah, I think we kind of both looked at each other and went, it's not likely to change anything for us anytime soon. And that was what we had been told.
I mean, don't forget that until the point where it happened, people were still fighting in the courts. People who'd been in long-term relationships and caring for sick partners in the States were still having their visa applications for their partners denied, and their partners were being forced to leave the States.
Yeah, right up until
last year.
Just disbelief, to be honest. I mean, I'm very well versed, with same-sex marriage and the developments, every step of the way, the whole journey. I've been keeping up with it and reading all the news stories, and just when it happened, I just couldn't believe it. It was like a dream, to be honest. It really was, and it's just amazing to see people's reactions as well. Like when we were at the Democrats Abroad thing, and just everyone was so happy. It was just amazing. It really was.
Yeah, for me, I was just in shock, really. I didn't really expect it to happen. I was expecting bad news, definitely. And the consequences of it have been great.
Yeah, it was a good day. We had been having some problems. We were both incredibly stressed and having some difficulties between us. And the day that decision came out, it just felt like we were hopeful again. And I remember I printed the decision at work and brought it home and got some champagne on the way home, and we just celebrated and just thought, okay, maybe everything is okay with the world. But it just changed. I don't know. It changed us.
Yeah, it gave us hope again, in a sense that although we are really enjoying our life here in the UK, and we feel that we are quite stable. We have jobs. We have our place. We feel like this is home. It's still so nice to have an option. and an option that we didn't have before. And the fact that we didn't have it before, it made us go away from the places that we loved and the place that we belonged to. So it was definitely nice to know that we have an option.
I asked the couples if they were planning to move to the US now that they had the option to do so.
The state we're considering living in, North Carolina, does not not only does it not accept gay rights, it's actively passed anti-gay rights laws. Recently.
On October 10th, 2014, U.S. District Court Judge Max O'Cogburn Jr. struck down North Carolina's gay marriage ban, declaring the ban approved by state voters in 2012 unconstitutional. A number of other states have done the same recently.
I'm not sure, though, if we go back, that we'll ever leave. And so it's a little bittersweet for me because I'm not necessarily ready to give up on England yet. But I am ready to exercise our rights.
We talked a bit about it, and we think, we were never going to move here. So we know that plans don't always work out. But at the moment, I think we would agree that if we were moving back, we would move back to New York. Because if you're a gay couple, it's also one of the easier places to live. Because even if gay marriage ever gets passed in North Carolina, there are places in North Carolina that I would love to live. But if you leave those places, it's not as easy as if you live in New York. So I think if we were going to move back, it would probably be to New York. But again, never say never.
I love New York, so.
Yeah, and we want to have kids, and we don't know. It seems like raising kids here, it's not a bad thing, and I'd be happy to do it. But poor children, they have an Italian mom, an American mom. They live in England. Their accents are going to be crazy. And if we moved back, I don't know.
At least one is from there.
Yeah.
Like we would, I would like one day to go back there, maybe to live. I don't know.
This wasn't just a victory for Edie and Thea. It was a victory for the LGBT community in the US and those living abroad who were exiled because they happened to have a foreign partner or spouse.
Why does